presentation and then followed by Tone. And now we're being recorded. Perfect. So
Yeah,
Tone, if you could
sorry,
just
I forgot to click that earlier.
it's all good, Miles. Tone, if you could just so just to outline everything here, it's 1166 Bank Street, and I will jump into a bit of context. If you could change the slide, Tone.
I am
Trying to do so.
Yeah, I'm not sure why it's not changing.
Well, I'll wait till we get the pretty graphics up.
Hang on. Why is it not changing? From beginning. Why is it not changing? Why is it not changing? Right. Technology always works until it doesn't, right?
Oh, you can manually advance it.
There we go.
Perfect. So we've already gone through the introductions. You can advance one more, Tone, please. So just a bit of a brief context. Subject property is located in an area that's bounded by Glen Avenue to the north, Ossington Avenue to the south, Bank Street to the east, and Grosvenor Avenue to the west. Directly to the south of the subject property across Grove Avenue is a 4-story mixed-use building containing retail uses at grade with residential uses above. West of the subject property is predominantly characterized by a mix of low-rise residential uses. To the north and south along Bank are a mix of low-rise retail, restaurant, commercial, and office uses. Further to the north is the Rideau Canal and Lansdowne Park. The Rideau River, Riverside Drive, and Billingsbridge Shopping Center are located further to the south. Subject property is located along bus transit routes with connections to rapid transit options in the immediate area, including the Carleton O train station located to the west. Bus stops on routes 6 and 7 are provided in front of the property along Bank Street and on the south side of Grove Avenue across from the subject property. Both of these routes are designated as frequent transit routes, offering high frequency bus service within immediate walking distance of the subject property. Having frontage along Bank Street provides a connection to the city's active transportation network directly from the subject property. The property is designated Main Street Corridor and Evolving Neighborhood Overlay in the interurban transect of the official plan. Policies of the official plan are supportive of a mid-rise mixed-use building on the subject property. With respect to zoning, property is zoned traditional Main Street subzone 2, and there is a height limit of 15 meters on subject property. It's also located within the mature neighborhoods overlay in the zoning bylaw. Current zoning on the property permits development of a mixed-use building up to 5 stories or 15 meters in building height. So based on the existing and planned context, the official plan designation and zoning, subject property is a suitable location for mid-rise intensification. Next slide, please, Tone. So with respect to the site plan, it's proposed to develop a 6-story mixed-use building containing 37 dwelling units and 4 ground floor commercial units on the subject property. There's a combined total of 14 underground parking spaces that are provided for residents and visitors, and they'll have access off of Grove Avenue. There's 59 interior and 4 exterior building bicycle parking spaces provided, so that's 63 in total. And the subject of this discussion tonight, minor zoning bylaw amendment application being required to facilitate the proposed development through the establishment of site-specific zoning provisions, which include an increase to the maximum permitted building height, alterations to the required angular plane for the proposed building from the rear lot line, a reduction of the minimum total amenity area requirement, and a reduction to the minimum communal amenity area requirement. The property is also subject to a site plan control application in order to facilitate the development, and this has been filed concurrently with the current application. So just with that, I will highlight a few additional details on the zoning for everyone's reference. Thanks, Tone. First, regarding the request to increase the maximum permitted building height. The existing TM2 zoning limits the maximum permitted building height to 15 meters. So relief from the zoning provision is required to increase the maximum permitted building height by 5 meters to 20 meters in order to facilitate the proposed development. So with that, policies of the official plan are supportive of intensification in areas that are designated Main Street corridor, and they permit building heights of up to 9 stories where appropriate transitions can be provided to abutting lots. As stated, a 6-story building is proposed on the subject property. And I'll just note that building step backs are provided above the 4-story along the front and corner side yard. This is used to establish a pedestrian scale and provide a built form transition to existing properties across Bank Street and to the south across Grove Avenue. In the rear yard, a 4.5 meter setback is provided from the rear lot line from levels 1 to 4. And then above the 4-story, there's a 3.9 meter building step back in order to establish a transition in height and to help fit within the low-rise scale of the neighborhood located to the west. Subject property also abuts a 3-meter wide untraveled public laneway that is currently vegetated with trees and shrubs along the west property line. And I would note that the existing laneway condition is to be maintained in order to provide further visual separation between the proposed building and the adjacent property to the west. Subject property is also located with direct access to bus stops along the Freco Transit network and the Bank Street corridor, as previously mentioned. It's also located within an appropriate area for increased building heights at a mid-rise scale that help to support the use of active transportation and public transit. So the proposed development of a mid-rise mixed-use building with a total building height that is greater than permitted by current height provisions on the subject property is consistent with policies of the official plan and maintains the general intent of the traditional Main Street zoning. Thanks for that, Tone. So secondly, regarding alterations to the required angular plane, provisions of the TM2 zone require that there's a 45-degree angular plane to be provided for any part of a building at a distance of 7.5 meters from the rear lot line and at a height of 15 meters from average grade. So relief from the zoning provision is required to accommodate the proposed building envelope. It is requested to modify where the angular plane is to be applied by reducing the required 7.5 meter setback from the rear lot line to 4.5 meters, and by increasing the height from which the angular plane is measured from 15 meters to 15.6 meters. When taking into consideration the existing 3-meter wide public laneway condition and that it will be maintained, a functional setback of 7.5 meters is provided from the proposed building to the abutting residential lot located to the west. And also, as previously noted, the untraveled public laneway is currently vegetated with trees and shrubs, which will provide a visual separation from the adjacent property along the west property line. Establishing a 45-degree angular plane for the proposed building that is provided at a distance of 7.5 meters from the abutting residential lot to the west and at a height of 15.6 meters maintains the intent of the angular plane provision. Next slide, please, Tone. And then third, with respect to reductions to the total amenity area and the communal amenity area for the project. So I'll just note that the combined total amenity area requirement for the proposal is 288 square meters. The total required communal amenity area for the proposed development is 144 square meters. So relief from the zoning provision is required to reduce the combined total amenity area provided for the building residents from 288 square meters to 113.4 square meters. Relief from the zoning provision is required to reduce total community amenity area provided for building residents from 144 to 59 square meters, and it's located on the 5th floor of the proposed building. The decision to provide a reduction to the total required amenity area and total required community amenity area for building residents is in response to the proximity of the proposed development to a range of recreational amenities located within a 15-meter walk of the subject property, which include the Rideau Canal, Rideau River, walking paths, parks, and community centers, among others. And I think Tony will go into a bit more detail on that on his slides. So based on the publicly accessible amenities that are located in the immediate area, a reduction to the total required amenity area and total required communal amenity area provided on the subject property is appropriate for the proposed development. And with that in mind, our client also acknowledges comments received from the community regarding the amount of any amenity areas that are being proposed. And we are looking at the possibility of providing additional amenity space for residents that will be located on the roof. And I expect that Tone will have some further discussion on this item as part of his remarks. And with that, I will hand things over to Tone for the discussion of the design approach. And thanks for your time.
Thanks, Jeff. That was great. So when we started this project, we started off by looking carefully at site analysis. So similar slide, we looked at sort of focusing on a desire for a highly sustainable infill building that would contribute not just architecturally to the community, but also socially. And that this would be something that would provide residents with homes, but also connect those residents to a broader community of shops, stores, cafes, libraries, parks, schools, and the natural setting of the community. This is typically sort of referred to as the third space, the social surroundings that are separate from the two usual social environments of the home and the workplace. So for example, on this graphic you see on the screen, there are numerous parks within walking distance of the proposed site at both Brewer and Windsor Park, as well as the green space of the canal, Dow's Lake, the Arboretum, Browns Inlet, and the Rita River Islands and green space along the river. There are also city facilities at Brewer Park, the Ottawa South Community Centre on Sunnyside, a branch of the Ottawa Library, as well as Lansdowne, and other facilities in the Glebe. The Billings Estate Museum and its green space, the Billingbridge Mall and Transit Hub, as well as medical facilities are located just across the river. There are also community gardens at Brewer and Windsor Parks, plus several daycares. So overall, the community context suggests that this is a vibrant place that is suitable for moderate, sustainable infill and supported by plentiful third spaces. Digging in more closely, we see that within the immediate context, the community is well served by transit and has many small businesses and retail or commercial uses on the main street, and it's well connected to the transit hubs. In many respects, Old Ottawa South is the epitome of a traditional main street. Recent construction north of the site at Bank and Elmer has a large new residential mixed-use building at 1050 Bank. This is a good sign of a neighborhood that's evolving, and while that site is significantly larger than ours and opted for a different approach to the design, we felt the site for the proposed new building would benefit from a highly sustainable infill approach. So as discussed, and as you know, the site's located at Bank and Grove with a single-story retail store set well back from the street with surface parking in front. We know that the building is much loved by the community for the fact that it has a convenience store and postal outlet. And part of our planning goal has been to facilitate a way for a new building that would allow for similar uses to return to the site when the construction is completed. The site is significantly sloped. It's not always necessarily apparent, but there's about a meter's change grade between the highest corner at the north end of the site and the lowest at the entry corner off Grove. That creates some significant challenges for how the retail store will provide a fully accessible entrance along the slope of Bank Street. And we made an early design decision to make sure that each entrance would be accessible and allow interior stores to be combined into a larger space if needed. In looking at the site context, we also noticed that the adjacent building to the south of the site at Grove, which was built about 20 years ago, has modest-sized punched windows set in a grid over the ground floor retail stores, has near zero lot line walls, and has small French balconies at patio doors in some units. As you can see in photo 5, looking at the site from Grove Avenue, the laneway that's heavily landscaped in our design, we strive to retain this foliage to help ensure privacy to homes along Grove, as well as to maintain greenery in the area. So I wanted to just mention briefly about postal services, because this was a comment discussed with the councillor's office. We understand how important it is for the community to have access to a local postal outlet. So this is really outside the planning requirements and the obligations of the Planning Act, but I wanted to show how we actually care about how the community feels about the fact that the postal outlet might leave. So we did some research into the requirements so the community knows what's required. A retail postal outlet is a franchise type outlet, and it's obtained through Canada Post. So whether that's with the store owner directly or a third party, I'm not exactly sure, but it is a franchise that's been obtained. Canada Post is a federally regulated crown corporation, and they have a mandate to provide services to the public via their postal charter. In that charter, it requires that, as per Section 10, which you see on the screen, 78% of consumers have a postal outlet within 2.5 kilometers, 88% within 5 kilometers, and 98% within 15 kilometers. So at some point, presumably, the person who has the franchise to the postal outlet currently has a responsibility to notify their parent. The franchise will be ending under whatever terms of contract they have with Canada Post. Once that franchise ends, Canada Post is obligated to ensure that it meets its charter requirements to provide a retail postal outlet within the prescribed areas of service. Now, I'm not certain offhand exactly where there are other postal outlets nearby and how they go about assigning that to a new location, whether they open a new store, whether they advertise that franchise, whether that's an RFP for that. I'm not exactly sure how that process unfolds because that's entirely driven by Canada Post and their customer service obligations under the charter. So we started our preliminary design probably a year and a half, almost 2 years ago. And one of the first things we did was look at the site and think about what we knew then about the site. And this was work that we did in support of a preliminary pre-consultation with city staff. So we wanted to develop the desire to achieve a welcoming streetscape with ground floor retail and commercial uses with residential above. When we presented to city staff, we expressed the desire to achieve a high quality public realm by setting the ground floor of the building back by approximately 2 meters and overhanging the 2nd to 4th floors. So that would create a better public realm on Bank Street by allowing for landscaping, patio space for cafes, or the use of the ground floor plane by stores, as well as a sense of widening of the public sidewalk. We also suggested that Grove Avenue could be redesigned to improve the community experience with a raised sidewalk crossing along Bank Street to enhance pedestrian safety in crossing Grove. We also suggested that the construction of a landscape median in line with the laneway and to potentially convert a small portion of Grove between the laneway and Bank to two-way traffic. That would relieve the neighborhood of drivers going down the wrong way down Grove, as well as reduce traffic having to go around the block via Glen in order to do deliveries or pick up garbage. We suggested that this two-way portion of Grove could be treated as a Woonerf, allowing it to be used as a shared space, so that when cars enter or exit, they're incentivized with visual cues to drive slower, and the resulting piazza space could be used for daytime public uses, including expansion of cafe seating or otherwise. After that pre-consultation with city staff, the result and the feedback was not positive. To begin with, the city rejected the idea that the front facade at grade should be set back and insisted that the front wall of the building be as tight to the street as possible. The city also informed us that this portion of Bank Street is subject to a planned road widening of 5.3 meters. We also learned that a portion of the property had been transferred to the city, which is shown in red on the screen. And that was done about 25 years ago and takes out a corner of the site. We pushed back on this road widening, arguing that it doesn't really make sense to widen the street that's already 4 lanes wide by an additional 5 meters, even if that's nominally to create more sidewalk and bike lanes, especially since Bank Street, both north and south of the site at the canal on the river, is already being narrowed to 3 lanes where that's being considered. We suggested that improving the public realm with bike lanes, street trees, bigger sidewalks is better accomplished by removing a lane of parking, especially since this road widening is unlikely to work when there are already so many existing buildings unlikely to be redeveloped, including the 4-story apartment building to the south of the site, on which that planned roadway widening was reduced 20 years ago. Senior planning staff assured me that removal of on-street parking is absolutely impossible and will never happen, and that the local BIA won't permit it, and that on-street parking is an absolute necessity for a walkable neighborhood. Our ability to push back on this position is, of course, extremely limited in the face of planning staff insisting that on-street parking is untouchable. So through negotiations over several months, we were able to reduce the road widening to about 1 meter, which is shown in green. The city takes this road widening from the owner for free. We did explore taking back a portion of the area shown in red, but we are informed that even though this land is taken from the owner for free, returning to the owner imposes not only the cost of surveying, processing, and circulation, but is then sold to the owner for market rates. So given that inequity and effort, we opted not to pursue retaking some of that red space. Other comments from staff included a desire to avoid color in the building, adding beige and gray to suit the context of the existing buildings. So we took those comments under advisement and gave them consideration as we advanced our design. So I want to talk briefly about our approach to sustainability, because applying sustainability after the fact is not a successful approach. We integrate sustainability from the get-go. So the owner commissioned new surveys, reports, and other documents and studies for the site. And we continued to then develop the design, looking to create a sustainable, zero carbon building constructed of mass timber, and that's energy efficient. The basis of the design is to create a mass timber building. So recent changes to the building code, as well as ongoing initiatives, have made mass timber not only more viable, but more economically feasible. Buildings contribute to over 40% of greenhouse gas emissions globally, and more than 10% of that is in embodied carbon. So a concrete building, a conventional approach, would require enormous carbon investment that is effectively impossible to recover through operational efficiencies. Choosing mass timber means that we sequester carbon in the structure, we lock it in and leave it there, while growing a new forest to extract and embody more carbon for the next generation. This material and system can be a bit more expensive up front, but one of the reasons it's chosen is because it improves construction sequencing and reduces impact on the community. There can be fewer or no construction cranes. There's faster construction with less impact on the community. There's less noise, there's zero construction waste, and there's less intrusion from construction activities that result in a higher quality building with fewer problems. But there are some limitations. Windows are generally limited to not more than 10 feet or 3 meters wide when there is brick or masonry cladding, because it has to be self-supporting. It can't be supported from concrete slabs like in a conventional high-rise building. So this trade-off is considered in how we design. And because the building's a more sustainable structure, we try to take advantage of that opportunity to make a more operationally sustainable building. One of the most significant losses of energy losses through windows. If we make something highly sustainable but pepper it with windows, we riddle the exterior with an incredibly energy inefficient system. We defeat the purpose of a sustainable investment. So we look to target our placement of windows and sizing of windows, as well as other openings and orientation to preserve views and privacy of the neighbors, to limit the overlook of other people's yards. So with the reports and studies in hand, we began developing our design. So as I said, we'd attempted to bring the city on board to modify the design of Grove Avenue as part of ongoing work planned for 2023. Despite several meetings and attempts to do so, the city opted not to participate in a collaborative way. So while the city does have some plans to add a landscape island with a precast planter, which you see on the left, it's not aligned with the lane. The lane is narrowed, the traveled lane on Grove is only narrowed to 5 meters, whereas one lane of traffic could be as little as 3. And this, in my opinion, doesn't do much to resist the chances of mitigating traffic headed the wrong way down Grove. And it doesn't do much to enhance the public realm. It's not aligned with the lane, and it's, to me, a lost opportunity for the city to create a continuous green space with healthy trees in line with the landscaped public lane. We complied with the city's requirements, and we pulled the building, ground floor of the building close to the property line, which is shown in red. And we set back a portion of the building only where exit doors are located, as they can't swing out onto the public sidewalk. In doing so, it effectively eliminates the opportunity for significant landscaping in front of the building on the property, and it all but eliminates the opportunity for terraces or balconies at the upper floors, and it eliminates projecting balconies. Where we can, we've introduced plant material along the facade, including forester grasses, sumac shrubs, and a new Japanese lilac tree. There's a bike rack provided at the corner, along with some interior bike racks on the ground floor to provide excess bike parking and encourage active transportation. The ground floor is reserved for retail and commercial units. And we know, as I said, how important the corner store is to the community, and the owner is prepared to allow another corner store to come back when construction is finished. The ground floor could be a single store or broken up into multiple units, depending on leasing needs and the market requirements. The residential entrance is off Grove and has a very small lobby space, as well as a generous at-grade bike room. Locating the main bike room at grade enhances the ease of bike use and encourages people to use their bike without having to go down into the depths of a parking garage. It also makes the bike room more used, creating a shared space for people to interact. The bike room has space for a bike servicing stand, and both the lobby and the bike room feature elements to support the city's transportation demand management commitments, which include graphics showing the walkable neighborhood, features in the area, distance to transit hubs such as Billings Bridge, as well as an offering to residents of information on multimodal transit options. As I said earlier, the ground floor space is designed to allow for the return of a corner store, and when it returns, should a corner store have a franchise agreement with Canada Post, that's absolutely welcome. That's, of course, outside the requirements of the planning process, but the owner is amenable to those discussions and the tenancy of the retail units. In response to city staff comments, we've introduced more brick and masonry cladding. We've also eliminated a lot of the color based on city feedback and options to provide some ceramic cladding in slate blue and an accent in sage green on the south side. The blue cladding that you see here on the Bank Street side is a high-end European glazed ceramic paneling that provides a lighter weight material suitable for mass timber buildings. It's a panelized system that's designed to be sustainable and comes in a range of colors. We're thinking that this is, as I said, a sort of soft slate blue, and that works well with red brick and limestone. There's space that's earmarked on the facade for a possible element of public art to be designed and installed separately from the project, if that should occur. We've also saved space on the wall above windows to allow for signage of the retail stores, and I've indicated that as with a little placeholder that says sign. We've also panelized the material over the masonry between the ground floor windows to create a unifying ground floor street frontage. We've extended the sill of the windows to grade, and that's at significant environmental cost, but as an effort to increase the size of the windows and improve the perception of those spaces as being for retail stores and uses. We've also advanced our design to consider additional glazing in other areas. Overall, the Bank Street facade was originally submitted and circulated, was about 32% glazing. And with some options and some minor tweaks and revisions, we've increased that to about 40%, though that makes some challenges to interior layout of rooms and spaces a bit more challenging. I'd also say that the north wall, what you see on the right side of the screen, is close to the building lot line and is effectively zero when that's blank, and it's intended so that future development down the road near the giant bike store and the ulteriors former bank building could allow for further development to happen that's tight to that line, creating a unifying street frontage. And the signage we're picturing is sort of a panelized wooden, painted signage with some overhanging lights, not unlike what you see at Paddy's Pub down the street. At the back of the building, we maintained a limestone base across the entire facade, and we limited windows to the ground floor retail units. We wanted to help ensure that there would be privacy to the ground floor plane between the neighbors and any commercial uses of the ground floor. A typical retail or commercial space might use that back wall as storage or washrooms, so windows aren't really beneficial to its use, but that ultimately will depend on who leases that space. The second, third, and fourth floors extend over the ground floor and offer windows facing the neighborhood. Again, we wanted to create a facade that offers energy efficiency and didn't impose excessive windows that would impact neighboring properties' sense of privacy. About 23% of that wall surface is windows, and we looked at ways of potentially increasing this in thinking of options and noting that even if we maximize window areas, making walls of each apartment hold significantly larger windows due to limited windows in the ground floor commercial space, as well as engineering requirements for wall stability, we cap at about 32% windows. One other area we looked at was how to provide balcony space for the apartments. With the city's request that we have the building as close to the front line as possible, shown in the red line on right, we can't have any balconies in the front of the building unless they're recessed from the street. While that's possible, they tend to be small, dark, and present significant challenges for waterproofing, maintenance, and durability, not to mention lost living space in already modest-sized rental apartments. Only when the front of the building steps back 2 meters above the fourth floor can we achieve any balcony space. Likewise, at the rear of the building, the property line and that of the laneway shown in red on the left, we looked at balconies. While they could be provided, they would be structurally challenging as there are already a significant overhang. They'd also impact the sense of privacy of the neighbors. So for this reason, we chose to keep balconies only the 5th floor where the building steps back. As I said, we could provide balconies facing west, but they'd have, we'd have to have, we could provide balconies at the 6th floor as well, if there's a strong desire to do so, as well as on the Bank Street facing facade. This is also a good image to show the angular plane, which Jeffrey's already talked about. We also looked at providing amenity space required by zoning bylaw and how it's best approached. The bylaw requirement would result in a total square footage of communal amenity space of about 1,300 square feet. That shared space is larger than any single unit in the building, and in some cases, twice the size of any apartment. Amenity spaces in buildings like this are certainly beneficial to people to provide social gathering space and extend living beyond the 4 walls of a person's home. But to provide so much space in a small 38-unit building, a shared space of 740 square feet is proposed with 165 square foot outdoor terrace. that can provide lounge space for entertaining or gathering and offer all units access to an outdoor balcony space. We've also looked at an option to create a shared rooftop terrace. This is possible to do and something that could be done if there's a strong desire for this sort of shared amenity. It requires some building code analysis and buy-in from the city, as it could have a major negative effect on building code compliance, driving a change that would not make the building viable. So we feel that the reduced number of private amenity spaces is beneficial to suit the compatibility with the neighborhood and reflections of the city's requests. If we provided additional balcony space, for example, at the second floor overlooking Bank Street, they'd be sort of right over above traffic, right above the bus stop, and I don't know that that kind of balcony would be well used. This is a summary of the cladding that we've proposed for the building. About 50% of the cladding on the building is brick or masonry. 30% of the cladding is a ventilated ceramic paneling, and the balance of that, so only about 20%, is metal siding. We've proposed a series of muted colors focusing on beige and gray tones preferred by city staff, along with a traditional red brick, introducing this palette of limited color in order to appease planning department requests while not making something that's too boring. The ventilated cladding isn't something that you often see in Ottawa, so there aren't a lot of precedent images of it. A few snippets are shown on the bottom left, but this is a panelized, glazed, or matte finish product that's installed on a subgirt structure, which creates a patterned finish of panels and allows the building to breathe, withstand weather, and comes in a range of colors from sunshine yellow to earth tones. It complements the look of traditional brick and limestone cladding with a smooth, modern paneling that's durable, needs no maintenance, and maintains its color fastness for a long time. It's quite difficult to capture in a small image seen on a screen, but you can find images of it online if you like. My preference is for some vibrancy, color, and interest. At the right, you can see some options we explored, but abandoned in consideration of choices of color, not to mention the trope of a fully glazed corner elevation. And we wanted to address the design of the building with more than just a trope. We also explored some other iterations. In this rendering, as you've seen from Grove Avenue, we've added a little bit more glazing on the south side facing Grove, as well as added a canopy over the residential entrances on Grove. We've also shown about 4 times the amount of landscaping on the traffic island in line with the laneway that we hope that the city will consider. Again, looking northward, we've explored that additional glazing on the south side at the corner and are showing the landscaping where it's possible to provide planting material. This elevation has evolved a bit since it was originally submitted in order to explore that additional glazing. So in the end, we've attempted to provide a building that meets the city's objectives. It meets the official plan objectives with a 6-story infill building. It's highly sustainable. It has plentiful brick and masonry cladding with a restrained use of color to meet planning requests. It's located as close to the front line as possible. Window placement and sizing respects privacy to neighbors and offers energy efficient goals. The ground floor facing Bank Street takes into account the slope of the land and anticipates the return of small businesses to an active, accessible street frontage. On-site parking is kept to an absolute minimum, and excess bike parking is provided for residents and visitors. Landscaping material is provided wherever possible, especially given staff direction and the demands for a road widening. We remain hopeful that the city is willing to participate in a collaborative approach to the design of Grove Avenue in the public realm, as well as open to future improvements in making Bank Street a more welcoming place for pedestrians and cyclists. We believe that this building will create a positive addition to the community, providing additional rental homes in the area, as well as added commercial activity, enhancing the character and livability of Old Ottawa South. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. Is anyone else speaking from the applicant side before I hand over to the planner?
No, Miles, that's it for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Murray. Okay, Colette, we're going to throw to Colette now, the city planner on file, just to briefly outline the planning process and where we are within it. Go ahead, Colette. Oh, you are sharing your screen. Full of surprises. Are you able to unmute yourself there, Colette?
Yes, here I am. Can you hear me?
I can hear you now.
Perfect. So hello, everyone. Thank you for coming tonight to this public meeting. So I'm just going to give a quick overview of kind of the zoning and site plan process that we'll be reviewing as part of this proposal, with a focus on the zoning application, because it's the main thing we're here to discuss today. So just a quick overview of what a zoning bylaw amendment is. So zoning of a property establishes provisions for how development will occur. In this case, we're only looking at a minor zoning bylaw amendment. So we're focusing on the performance standards because the use that is proposed is already permitted in the zoning bylaw. So, and then the purpose of this is just the end result will be us establishing, if the applicant is successful, establishing site-specific zoning and providing relief from provisions that perhaps are not able to be met to allow the proposed development. And this is just a quick overview of what is being proposed in their site-specific zoning exception. I won't go into too much detail as Jeffrey already went through it. And so in terms of process, what we've done so far, we've received the rezoning and the site plan control application. And along with the studies and plans to support that application, it was deemed that they were acceptable for review. And so we circulated those to technical agencies and the public, posted a sign on the site, and that all occurred on or around May 3rd. And we had a 4-week circulation period, which ended on May 31st. And then in terms of the rezoning process, so we're pretty early in the process. So we've done the technical and public circulation, and now we're having the community information session. And following this meeting, I'll be providing an overview or a consolidation of all the comments, both technical and public, received throughout the process to the applicant. And then it will be on them to address each of those comments and revise and resubmit their proposal. And there may be a few iterations of that until staff are at a point where they have a recommendation, whether negative or positive, to submit to planning committee, and then through a staff report. And then that staff report will go to planning committee, and then later city council, and then depending on the outcome, you know, if there's an appeal, you have 20 days to submit an appeal after council renders a decision. And if no appeal is received and it was passed, then it would be in effect. And then if the applicant is successful in their zoning bylaw amendment application, we would be able to move forward with a site plan control approval. These processes will be happening concurrently. You might notice that there are a few steps that are repeated on this process. So we'll be doing the reviews concurrently, but we're not able to approve a site plan until the proposal is zoning conformant. So the zoning bylaw amendment that they're proposing would need to be in effect before we're able to move forward with site plan approval. So we'll be going through that iterative process of going back and forth with comments, and then revising until staff are also satisfied. And then once the zoning's in effect and we are ready to move forward with site plan approval, you know, if they're successful, then we will prepare a staff report, which will include a number of conditions of approval that they will be obligated to fulfill. And then, we go through the concurrence process, and then eventually it would be a development review manager that would approve it. And upon that decision, we would send out a letter to both the applicant as well as anybody who has submitted comments throughout the process or is on the notification list. So if you're here, you'll receive a notice of decision, and you'll be let know or be advised of the outcome of the process. If you haven't provided input yet, I would encourage you to both review all the plans and studies that are available on the city's development application search tool. You can just search DevApps on Google, and it should be the first link. And then you can just search either by address or the file number, and you'll be able to review the links to all the plans and studies. And then once you've had a chance to review, I encourage you to provide comments either through the web portal on DevApps, or you can always email me directly. And even if you don't have any comments or questions, just an email or a request to be on the notification list is enough. And then you're also encouraged to attend planning committee, which is the formal public meeting for this application, or for the zoning application. So if you attend, you get 5 minutes and you're able to speak directly with members of planning committee. So when that time comes, 10 days before the report, the staff report goes to planning committee, everybody who's signed up will be notified and given the opportunity to request that, to provide comments in that way, either verbally or written. So, and that maintains your appeal rights as well. Yeah, generally, I encourage everyone to send comments if you haven't already. We accept comments up until the very last minute, basically. It may not be included in the consolidation of comments that are sent to the applicant if it's after the deadline, but we do consider all comments up until we submit the staff report. So I encourage everybody to provide me with comments, even if the May 31st deadline has already passed. So yes, thank you. That's the end of my presentation.
Thanks so much, Colette. And of course, if you are submitting comments, please also consider including our office on those comments, as we're also in dialogue with the applicant and wanting to hear from our residents. So that's capitalward@ottawa.ca. If you're sending us an email, or if you're attending this event tonight, you'll already know how to be in touch, since you needed to get an email to be here. Okay, so I'm going to hand over now to Laura from the Community Association to provide some initial feedback from the Community Association perspective. And I think I actually saw Carol come online as well. So feel free to have Carol also supplement comments. But please go ahead, Laura.
Thank you, Miles, and thank you to Colette and Ton and Jeff as well. So as we do at our community association, we've carefully looked over the application, and we're, we can see that the applicant has paid attention, and that's wonderful. And some of the things that we see on screen now that actually aren't on the application online are certainly helpful. So the increase in glazing windows on the ground floor for the retail is certainly something that I think people in the community that we heard comments on. So that certainly is helpful. We understand the need for aligning the height of the building with the official plan. And so certainly there is no argument to be made on the 5-meter request in additional height. For the rear plane, we would love to see if it's at all possible, and I'm sure it's just a quick line or two, if you could show where the bylaw requires the 15-point meter, 7.5 from the rear lot line, what that angular plane would look like if we were following what the bylaw requires as opposed to what is being requested. That would be helpful in order to sort of get a better sense of what the change is that's being requested and how much additional area is being put back there. The community has had some concerns with traffic. I don't know if Sue is on the call, Sue Neal, and if she is, if she'd like to make comment on that. On the drawings, actually, I think one of the things that we would ask is that there is this giant arrow going the wrong way on Grove that says, future city work or ongoing city work. But that's not really helpful in terms of someone who is looking at or analyzing the actual submission, so that if the drawings could show the large arrow going the right way, because Grove is a one-way street, and then where the traffic would be coming in and out of the parking garage with arrows as we typically show on architectural drawings, that would be helpful. And I think with the majority of comments that we've received, and certainly from the community association's point of view, of the requests that are being made, the biggest one is the amenity space, the reduction in amenity space. The bylaw doesn't concern itself with what the amenities in your neighborhood are, and any building that would be there that would be a multi-residential family units, small units, large units, medium-sized units, any building there would be a building that contributes to the overall feel of the community, and that contributes socially as a third space, because that third space already exists. So the third space would be there for any building that we put there. And that certainly is a contribution. I think the community needs rental housing, and we are certainly appreciative of having additional rental housing. But having third spaces does not relieve the applicant of the need for providing amenity spaces in a building for the people, the residents of that building. The residents of the building need the private amenity space and the communal amenity space. The units are fairly small in comparison to the building, admittedly on the larger site at 1050, 1060. But that is even more reason to provide people with amenity space. As we know, bylaws usually provide minimums. The amenity spaces required by the bylaw are not overly generous. They usually aren't. At least for the people who live in this building, we can provide the minimum that the bylaw is asking for. That is important because people who live in smaller units need spaces to get together. And we can say, oh, well, they can get together in the park, or they can get together. That might not always be possible. If there are senior citizens in this building, and there are many in our community who would like to downsize, they would like a place where they can all get together. If in a few of the larger units we could fit a small family, they would like places for their children and the children of other residents to get together. Community amenity space is important, both private and communal, because they help to form not just a building with people who leave their doors out of a corridor and leave the building and go somewhere else. They help to create community, and that's what makes it important. So I think that whether it's on the rooftop or elsewhere, the idea of providing community space is important. The need for private amenity space is equally important, particularly in a small unit. And if they have to be recessed balconies, well, there's a lot of that on 1050, 1060. You can see that. And perhaps we need to combine a few of the units in this building to make a larger unit in order to make that small balcony, recessed or whatever, possible. And I think we can all see that now as they exist on 1050, 1060. It may require a bit of redesign. It may require pushing two of the smaller units together to make a larger unit, whatever, but it can be done. And we certainly appreciate the fact that the applicant is willing to take a look at that and to provide that amenity space. So from the community point of view, knowing what it is that's being given up in terms of the rear angular plane is important. And by far, the most important thing is making sure that building residents have the minimal communal and private amenity space that the bylaw requires of us. And that's our pitch. Thank you. We also had a couple of questions beyond this, but perhaps, we can let people in and have people ask other questions. We don't know, has this project gone through the formal UDRP process already? Yes or no? And when are you planning on going to planning committee? So those are the other two questions. Thank you. Karen, you have anything else? Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Colette.
Oh, I was just going to say they are going to be required to go to UDRP. I don't believe they've submitted yet. It'll likely happen after they're provided with the first round of comments, I would imagine. Okay. So that date's not known, but it's usually once a month, so probably in the next few months. And of course they can confirm. And then in terms of planning committee, that will depend on the speediness of a returned submission, so a revised submission. So that date's not known yet either, but there is a 90-day legislated timeline, but that clock kind of goes on and off depending on whether the submission is in the city's hands, because there are new timelines, which some of you might be aware of, but because this application was submitted prior to that going into effect, they're subject to the old rules. So it'll be going that way. So yes.
If I can
Thank
ask on timelines, you said that the comment period ended May 31st.
Yes,
When will we receive the comment list?
this week.
Okay, and just on before we leave, I see Sue Neal is here. In fact, Sue is in the other meeting with me tonight, and I'm glad you've switched over here, Sue. Feels like I'm seeing in two places in the same night, but it's really just one place, I suppose. I know Carol's online as well from the planning committee. Sue, but your hand's up, so why don't we go to you from the transportation side of things, and then if Carol wants to add on from a planning committee perspective, we'll go there. I'm going to ask you to unmute.
Okay, thank you, Miles. And just following on from Laura's, I guess, question as to whether we wanted to talk about any traffic concerns. I think probably our concerns relate more to the city than to the actual developer and the design of the building. But just to make them, in case anyone from the city is listening here, we are concerned a bit about the traffic flow, in that there's no left-hand turn, as we know, onto Grove, so that anyone going to the residence or to the building will have to do the circuit, either going left on Ossington and around Grosvenor and up Grove, or to Glen and do the same circuit. This probably is not too much of a concern on Ossington, because we know that there are traffic calming mechanisms on Ossington, but it is a bit of a concern on Glen, which also passes through Hopewell School territory, as you know. So we're a bit concerned about the additional trucks in particular. Maybe not so many residents will be driving, but trucks, delivery trucks, vans, moving vans, etc., that will be making that circuit. So our plea to the city is to, first of all, make sure the signage is very clear, so we don't have cars turning left on Grove from Bank, but also, if possible, to think about some traffic calming mechanisms on Glen, in particular around the school. So I'll just leave it at that, but I think that's more the city than the developer that's to deal with those questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sue. Colin, did you want to comment briefly on that, or it's fine if not? We can also.
Yeah, sure. In terms of traffic, we are reviewing traffic as part of the development review process. So a transportation engineer will be taking a look at the submitted studies and plans just to assess the impact on the trip generation and that impact on the surrounding network. So we are going to be looking for that, and we wouldn't accept a proposal that had an undue negative impact on the system, or it couldn't be handled. So that'll be worked out through the development review process. And then in terms of traffic calming on Glen, unfortunately, that is kind of outside the scope of this particular development application. However, I believe Councillor Menard is on the call, so it's great that you've raised these concerns, and I'm sure he is willing to be an advocate for you in terms of budget and such to get those types of things implemented in your ward. But unfortunately, it is outside the scope of this particular application.
Thank you.
Thanks, Colette. And I don't see Carol's hand up. But if something comes up, Carol, just raise your hand at any point. We will be moving to the public Q&A. Before that, I had the councillor's comments, and it's actually not on this call. And just for those who've joined late, there was a last minute meeting. Well, at least we found out about it only yesterday on the Lansdowne 2.0 file. It's some important information is being divulged at that meeting, and we're not happy with the last minute notice and the overlapping timing of these things, but that's unfortunately where we are right now. And I'm here on behalf of the office and in the planning lead for the office in any event. And so I'll be playing that role as your facilitator tonight, but also listening to all the feedback. And again, the councillor sends his regrets. It's an unfortunate turn of events here with the timing of those meetings. I'll just say from our perspective, we're supportive of everything we've been hearing from the community association. Oh, Carol, sorry, I do see your hand up now. I'll throw to you first, Carol, just as the other half of the planning committee chair for OSCA. Please go ahead. Oh, let me ask you to unmute. There we go.
Yeah, thank you, Miles. Yeah, I just wanted to reiterate what the comments or concur with the comments that Laura made, especially on the communal space. You know, I think it is a very important point that she made, and it's great to have balcony space, but as we know in our climate, we can't use it, you know, 365 days a year. So during the winter months, you would be reduced to very small communal space within the building. And I think it's important to have a look at the space that is being provided. On the traffic thing, I know it's not to do with the applicant doesn't have control over this, but I think it would be useful for the community, because this is one of the big concerns about the traffic coming into the building along Grove. I travel along Grove quite often and encounter cars going the wrong way. And I know residents have commented on that as well. And I think it would be useful for the community if the traffic department could share some of the plans about how they're going to alleviate the problem and encourage people to not go the wrong way down Grove. I think it lived experience, I think in this instance would be quite useful to have some input from people who actually live on the street, and how you know, even some observation of what actually happens, because I think many of these buildings have residents who use Uber Eats. They use Uber for if they don't have their own transportation. Many people and younger people use the Uber to get around, even though the bus stop is right there. So you get quite a lot of that kind of traffic, which I know in some of the newer residential buildings had not been anticipated. Even Amazon deliveries become quite an issue of, you know, where do they park, and where they just stop in the middle, you know, beside the road and, you know, run in, and that could be quite a problem on Bank Street. So I think some of those things warrant looking at. I know it's not exactly part of this application, but it is a community impact that this building will have, and in regards to traffic. So if we could, you know, have some input into that would be great. So those are my main comments. Thank you.
Thanks, Carol.
If I could speak to that. Just
Tone,
briefly.
sure. If you want to provide
Yeah.
comments, please go ahead.
I mean, it was one of the first things that we noticed. One of my best friends lives on Grove, within spitting distance of the Quickie, and I've had many a coffee and a breakfast sitting on his porch, and you can sit there and, you know, regularly count the traffic going the wrong way, whether by error or not. You can regularly count the traffic zipping down the wrong way, and the street's also overly wide. And it was one of the foundational elements of thinking about how we would approach the design of that space. And to your point, Carol, about, you know, the Uber person, the taxi driver, the paratranspo, you know, doing that kind of pickup, you know, it could be vastly improved. And I mean, I'm not a civil engineer, I'm not a traffic engineer, but, you know, thinking about that urban quality of creating kind of a piazza, a plaza, something that's paved differently and treats that public realm of the street in a different way. We encourage that to happen. And we tried for over a year to meet with city staff and got absolutely nowhere. And the design that I shared earlier on the screen is the city's you know, infrastructure plan that's publicly available. That's where I grabbed that drawing from, is a narrowing of that street to only 5 meters, which is really not very much. I mean, that's you need 3.2 meters for a bus to pass. So a lane that's 5 meters wide is really huge, and it's really easy for cars to go the wrong way and not even notice that planter that's there. We think that it should be a bigger traffic island. It should be in line with the laneway. That should have a raised crossing so that cars that do try to go the wrong way are really impeded from trying to do so without preventing fire trucks and stuff, obviously. And to treat that space as a a permanent sort of plaza type space, similar to the temporary plaza that was done at Belmont, I think, over the last couple of summers next to Haute Couture, of creating a space that, you know, the paratransport person can pull in and have a place where they can stop and pick somebody up, or the Uber person pulls in. And so the garbage truck, when they pull in off of Bank, they're crossing a raised crossing so that it's safer for kids to go through. It incentivizes people to stop, and that it crosses that. And the garbage truck that serves both apartment buildings it doesn't have to go all around through the whole neighborhood. Same with a moving truck. That sort of very temporary intermittent use is incentivized through a better design. And we encourage the city to think of this. We offered to collaborate on the design process, and it just didn't happen. So I'm still hopeful that something comes to this. We're still open to that conversation, but it was just sort of a non-starter.
Thank you, Tone. Look, I don't want to take up more time given it's 8:12. Suffice to say, our office has been very supportive of what we've been hearing from our community association friends, and a lot of the comments we've heard coming in from the community. We share those concerns. The amenity space is the top among them. I'm a tenant, by the way, who doesn't have a balcony and would love one. And I can tell you it would be a real difference maker in my home life. And losing the communal space we have here would also be a major difference maker. And so I just want to say those things matter. Our office is with you on that. The other concerns mentioned as well, we've had some conversations already with the applicant, and there's been some movement. So we're happy with the trajectory we're on, and we're looking forward to continue working with the applicant team to have a winning development here. I'm going to hand it over now to the Q&A portion, open the floor, and I see one of my favorite community members in line there. Anna, that's you. I see your hand raised, and I'm looking forward to hearing your comment. Please go ahead. I've asked you to unmute. I'm not sure if you're seeing the prompt there. There we go.
Yes. Oh, what a compliment. One of the favorite community members. Thank you, Miles. So my name is Anna Kuilert, and I'm co-chair of... Okay, I see the message there. Yeah, so my name is Anna Kuilert, and I'm co-chair of Senior Watch Old Ottawa South. It's a committee of the Community Association. And to put it briefly, our committee is a watchdog for seniors, like a watchdog. And we concern ourselves with a whole bunch of things, but one of them is housing. And the reason is because our focus is for people, supporting people to age in place in the community. And lo and behold, we are such a popular community that I hear all the time from other seniors, oh, I love to move to your community, and there's no rental accommodation, or it's maybe too expensive or whatever. And but the seniors are coming. I think there are going to be more seniors in Old Ottawa South. And so regarding housing, we are, I echo what I've heard about the amenity space. And I have also mentioned it in my letter that it is the social aspect, in case you didn't know, but it is so important for the casual contacts between people. It doesn't have to be a long conversation, but even an exchange like, oh, Cedars has beautiful petunias, they arrived, or oh, where do you like your coffee? And it really does help, I think, for everybody, but especially for seniors, the mental health, the sense of belonging. Many of the seniors are widowed, or live by themselves, or single, and just the context, a sense of community is so important. And especially, I think you mentioned the presentation was really nice, but it mentioned something about amenity space on the roof. Well, of course, that's not so useful in the winter time. And the winters and the summers, they can really make it a challenge to go outside. to live in my own place, and I find, when it's a bad day, I'm not venturing even to the street, So it would be nice to have a place where you can sit on a bench in say the lobby, it's a good place. And not only that, there is, I don't know if anybody or the developers have heard of naturally occurring retirement communities, NORCs. It is something that that is growing. It is a recognized concept, and we like to see in a NORC with an oasis model, and an oasis is supportive services that are concentrated in a building, like an apartment building, that can help seniors age in place. Little, maybe their walker needs some checking, whatever questions they have. And it would be so nice to have a landlord that would make that possible. And, I won't get into the details now, but therefore a larger space is very important. Senior Watch has worked, we have a housing team, and they're working right now with another developer, and they are trying to develop an Abbey Field model. But before people need that, I think that there is maybe a provision, maybe through CMHC or the city, if you are a senior-friendly building, I think it could help your financing and many other things. So please, I would say meet with maybe our housing team could reach out to you, but please be open to that. It would be really nice to have a building with enough amenity space, and that it is affordable at the same time. We are doing a lot of things, and hopefully, we are looking at a little clinic. If you could be a bit reasonable with the rent, we have had negotiations like that with other landlords, and there is space for that. But I think that seniors are very good tenants, and I think they are a desirable group of tenants. And we also like young people, so it's not that we are against it. It is called intergenerational. So whatever, I will pass this on to our housing group, and now you have the heads up that we like to be part of the discussion. Do you have any questions? Do you like to know more from us? Or what is your response to this request?
Someone from the applicant team want to comment on?
So the building's 100% accessible.
I understand.
Every unit, every floor is 100% accessible. So, how the building is rented, who rents the units, whether they're seniors or otherwise, is not a specific target market. I mean, it's not, there's no determination of that. And there's no, what's the word I'm looking for? There's no zoning or planning designation for how the building is to be used, and there's no intention to earmark a specific target group. But the units are, how do I say this, modestly sized. Some of them are, there's a couple that are very small, and there are a couple that are larger, but most of them are in the sort of 600-700 kind of square foot kind of range, which is reasonable size for like a 1-bedroom den kind of space.
Yeah, I was more talking about the amenity space, the lobby, and
the lobby's large enough to allow for some seating and some interaction space at the lobby level. There have been a number of building code changes that prevent that kind of thing from happening, including things like having a postal, the mailbox for the building is no longer permitted in the lobby, because now it's no longer just mail, it's thousands of Amazon packages, and it impedes the egress out of the lobby. But there are a number of challenges associated with that. And this is partly why we introduced the bicycle room on the ground floor, so that people are, there's lots of bike parking, and people are able to get their bike, they're interacting, they're coming out at the ground floor level, and there's an interaction that happens. The hope is that nobody actually needs a car for the building, or very few people need a car who are residents in the building, because there's very limited vehicle parking.
Yeah.
So this is very interesting. Sorry, 1 second, Anna. So all of the kitchens and all of the bathrooms will be fully accessible?
Not necessarily. That's not a requirement under the building code.
No,
That
I
is
know.
that's an option.
You said they
That's
were
an option.
100% accessible, so I was getting all excited.
So the building is accessible, meeting the building code requirements. We're exploring options for, there's an option under CMHC financing, and I think it's 20% of the units are meeting CAN CSAB 651 accessibility standards. And that's an option that's being explored, but there's obviously a cost of that and a trade-off, and whether or not that pans out in financing versus construction costs. Those kinds of things are being explored. But that's a possibility.
So
Wonderful.
just in the interest of getting to hear from everybody, I think what I'll do, ask Anna, is if you want to go back in queue to do so. I'll lower your hand for now. I will just say before handing off to the next person that, working with SWOOS is a good idea. Certainly the Riverside and Bank Towers saw a higher accessibility percentage after a fruitful exchange there. And it's worth exploring here, of course, as well. It's a smaller build, of course, so there's different considerations, but just thanks for being here, SWOOS. And if you guys want to connect afterwards, I'm happy to facilitate that. And Anna, like I said, if you want to speak again, just raise your hand again and we'll get back in queue. But I see Douglas is also waiting to join in here. So Douglas, why don't you go ahead and jump right in?
Thanks, Miles. Look, I'll be brief. On balance, this is a good proposal and one worth supporting. I welcome it. It addresses some real needs in terms of housing and density and retail space on the ground floor. Having said that, there is room for improvement, and my particular concern is with regard to the retail space. Unlike the new building at 1050 Bank or the adjacent building, the dog food building just to the south, if I understand the drawings correctly, the retail space seems to turn its back on the street, and each unit does not seem to be accessible. There's a single door. It's more like a mall than shop front. And maybe I've misunderstood the drawings, but I don't think that kind of design is in keeping with the urban fabric. Thank you.
So
Thanks,
it's very similar to the, I don't know, you called it the dog food building. I think of it as the Bridgeshead building. So a series of, storefronts that face the street, that have a door, that have an entrance. Each of those storefronts has a door that faces the street with lots of windows and lots of glass facing the street. So each of those has that. Admittedly, it's difficult to see on a small screen, but each of the storefronts has that. And because the building has a meter change or almost a meter change along the Bank Street frontage, either, and I think you see this in the dog food building, some of the doors, something didn't quite go right. So some of the doors aren't quite accessible. We've sought to try to make sure that every door is accessible, which means of necessity that not the entire slab that's at that ground floor isn't all at the same level, because it sort of steps down the hill, if you will. So depending on which stores are combined, they may have an internal step or not, or depending on which units are mixed together, and that'll really depend on how that space is rented. If one person, I don't know, and we need another Shoppers Drug Mart a block away from the other one, and that becomes one giant Shoppers Drug Mart, then so be it, and it's on sort of multiple levels inside, and that's part of the tenant process.
So Ton, quick question on the rendering that you showed now of the front elevation. The glazing or the windows appeared to be increased in size, and I think you spoke to that. So
Yep.
I think if you could show that for a second, then Scott may be able to see that you've actually increased the percentage of glass area on the Bank Street elevation.
One moment, please.
Yeah, that would be good to see again. I note that the final slide still had the old frontage, and but in the middle of the slide deck, there was that updated version that yeah, has it's a welcome response to the comments received, and we understand there's an environmental trade-off there, but we appreciate that this is still a sustainable building, and that yeah, there it is.
So my mouse is going weird here. Hang on. There we go. So this, if this was 4 stores, you'd have a door with full height glazing, transom, and then this is recessed back slightly because there's a corner. This is a full height window with a transom, and then this is signage that's above here. And so this is, you know, some signboards and materials and finishing to kind of unify that frontage. Giant picture window, sort of a pilaster here, giant picture window, storefront. This is a store entrance to this unit. So if these were divided, you know, there's potentially a wall between here, and that's, you know, a Starbucks, and this is another Starbucks, and then this is another door that takes you into this store, and then this is a window to this unit. And this unit is probably the largest of the units, probably ideal for like a cafe because it's got the biggest sort of back of house kind of space. You know, and it has its door. And so if these 2 units are combined, there's a step of about, you know, 8 inches or so between the 2 in here. If these 2 stores are combined, they're all at one level. And if these 2 are combined, there's a step of about 12 or 14 inches between that door and that door as Bank Street goes downhill, because unfortunately the world is not flat. And then it continues to slope down the other side as well. And then the signage bands are sort of like, you know, Paddy's Pub. It's sort of, you know, I don't know if it's going to be a pub, but it's that kind of signage. It's not like an ugly illuminated sign box. And the city charges a annual rental fee to allow light fixtures like this to overhang the sidewalk. So we would anticipate doing something like that with some sort of, you know, bump out kind of signs, lights across the front here.
Thanks, Tom. Okay, so next up, I see Brian Tansey. Brian, I haven't seen you since Environment Committee. Just wanted to say I really enjoyed your delegation. I don't know if your language will be as colorful tonight, but who knows? Anyways, I'll ask you to unmute and please go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Miles. So I wanted to say that I'm really quite impressed, Tom, with the efforts you've made with the city to do things that in effect the city has really not been very helpful. You didn't use that word, I am, but I'm kind of surprised at the city's lack of flexibility, and I encourage you to keep at it, because now you're our pointy end on that, on a lot of the things you talked about that you tried to think up and build in. And there are a lot of elements that you really have put in there that it shows a lot of thought and working around all kinds of problems, in addition to the city's difficulty. So the only thing I wanted to emphasize, though, is that basically what Anna said before, and she used a very good phrase, which was the need, it's the amenity space thing, on both the private and the community space. Having that space for what Anna quite rightly called casual encounters. I mean, how do you measure that? You can't measure that. Actually, I used that concept when I was working for Canadian Pacific years ago in designing buildings for employees. And we calculated who is it that needs frequent day-to-day face-to-face interaction. And that's how we decided who was going to be where. This is the same kind of concept, only now we're talking about something even more important, and you've already addressed it, because you talked about the social aspects, that you even introduced, I think, a little bit from left field, the business about the third space. I'm talking about the space there, not the third space, for people who are going to live there. I'll never live there, but I can imagine being a person who lives there, and you want this to happen. You want to create opportunities for community building, especially the casual ones, which are very hard to measure. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Brian. Very well said. I have next on my list, Michael O'Hare. Michael, I'm going to ask you to unmute. Please go ahead.
Hi, thank you. So my question is for Toon. My concerns were really about the ground floor retail, which I think you just discussed, and I really do like the improvements with the store frontage. But just to reiterate, I think in our neighborhood, we have a pretty good retail landscape, but definitely could be improved. And the original drawings really looked kind of like a dead retail space in that, for that whole part block with this. But the new drawings that you show definitely seem like improvement. But so I guess what I'm looking for is clarification, because the application summary still states that the main entrance for retail is off of Grove, which doesn't seem to be one, consistent with the drawings, but also if that is the case, if that was ever envisioned that the main access to the retail is off Grove, that wouldn't be great for the businesses.
No, I'm not sure where that's written, but the residential entrance is off Grove. All the retail entrances are off of Bank.
Okay, that seems better. That's in the application summary. So the other point I wanted to raise again, it's about really making that ground floor retail as great as it could be. So it's to our city representative Colette, and it's so it was the applicant mentioned that they tried to get a recess for the ground floor of a couple of meters to improve the patio space and things like that, but that was rejected by the city. So I'm just wondering if Colette could speak to that, or why that was rejected. It would seem like a good idea to be able to have some more patio space and just more space between the street and the building for more use for the residential, for the retail. So is there any reason why that was something the city couldn't agree to?
I wasn't the planner at the time of the pre-application consultation meeting, but generally speaking, what we're looking for along traditional main streets is a strong building frontage, and I believe the proposal at that time did not meet the intention of those policies in the official plan to the degree that the city was looking for, and therefore it was posed as a consideration to the applicant to explore bringing that frontage closer, and that was something that the city could, be more supportive of. There are also provisions in the traditional Main Street zone requiring minimum front yard setbacks for buildings along the streets, along traditional Main Street, which this is. So, it was ultimately up to the applicant if they wanted to request any sort of amendment to that, they could, but they chose not to proceed with that. And generally the city is pretty happy with the building frontage proposed currently. So, and we're looking for above all, conformance with the policy of the official plans, and we also have applicable design guidelines to guide kind of development along these spaces. So that's what we are basing our comments on, but the applicant is more than welcome to propose requested relief, and the staff are willing to consider that. So we're reviewing the proposal that's in front of us.
And from our perspective, the setback is a maximum, I think it's the ground floor setback is a maximum of 2 meters from the front lot line. And we had proposed that the ground floor be set back 2 meters so that the second, third, and fourth floors would overhang that space. That helps create sort of a distinct language for the ground floor being treated in a different materiality than the upper floors. The feedback we got from pre-consultation and follow-up from urban design staff was we're welcome to propose something, but they would be not supportive of any setback, really. And that was certainly the impression that we were given, that having the front of the building as tight to the lot line at the frontage as possible, as practical, was what was desired, combined with the fact that the building desired to have masonry cladding, which it didn't anticipate previously. Having masonry cladding has to be supported on the foundation. You can't just sort of hang it over the edge of the building. Now 1050 Bank does that. It is a concrete building. And as I said before, if we turn this into a concrete building, we could do that, have more masonry, have, brick on shelf angles supported from the edge of slabs like 1050 Bank does, but it is a completely different approach to sustainability. and embeds a massive amount of carbon in the structure, and is also extremely disruptive to the neighborhood, as you probably all lived with at 1050 Bank, with tower cranes and closed streets and so forth. Whereas a mass timber building like this is modular, no waste, highly sustainable. And the structure for something like this can go up in as little as 6 weeks. So it's a lot less disruptive to the neighborhood. But the trade-off is that the brick has to be supported on a foundation.
Okay, I really appreciate that explanation, Tone, and thank you for the question, Michael. I'm going to pass off now to Chloe or Chloe. I see your hand is raised. Please go ahead. I'm asking you to unmute.
Thanks. Really appreciate the opportunity to make some comments and ask some questions. Put my video on here. And I'll just qualify by saying I'm the immediate neighbor at 5 Grove, adjacent to the property. So I certainly have a personal interest in what's happening here. So first off, maybe some positives. I really like some of the changes that have happened since the development application. I think the larger windows are looking great. And you know, I think it was interesting to hear the strategy around the choice of colors and some of the direction from the city to go towards more muted colors, because personally, I really love the blue, and the beige is a little bit drab. So I would be happier with some bolder moves for material choices and colors on this building for sure. I think the comments you were making about, Toon, about the earlier submission for traffic strategies around this building, they're fantastic to hear. They're things that my husband and I have talked about, wow, wouldn't it be great if the city would do this? They're doing this road work. Couldn't we do something to reduce the number of runway vehicles going down Grove? Because we see it all the time. And wow, it would be great if the landscape of the laneway is extended to create sort of a narrowing of that roadway to really make it obvious to vehicles that that you shouldn't be going the wrong way down Grove. So those are all things that it's really great to hear the backstory, and I really hope that the city will maybe listen and maybe try to incorporate this, because there's a project happening right now. It seems like it's the perfect opportunity to try to address some of these considerations. And maybe just to move on to some of my concerns, you've mentioned the buffer of the laneway as this great green space. I completely agree, living next door to it. But I'd note the application missed close to half the trees on the laneway. So my question would be, how will those trees be protected during construction? The foundation wall of the parking garage roof and planter is almost a 0 setback from the laneway, and some of those trees are a few feet from that construction. So, you know, how will those trees survive the construction that's going to be happening immediately adjacent? And I expect some pruning is going to be certainly required as well. So that's my one question and concern. And my second question and concern is the rooftop area over that parking garage. It's immediately adjacent to my backyard. So personally concerned that it really looks well suited to become some type of patio or potentially restaurant space, which I don't think is a good adjacency, adjacent, you know, to this residential quiet neighborhood. You know, there's probably lovely quiet patios that could happen there, but it also could be a very loud pub or bar. So that's a concern, and it struck me with the lack of amenity space for community members. Wow, wouldn't that roof be a great space for the residents of the building, like a residential use adjacent to residential uses? So that's my second concern. Like, what is the intention for that roof? Because right now it's labeled as inaccessible, but practically, you know, the windows that are sized immediately against that roof are exactly the correct proportion to be doors. I would assume that space will be used in some way, and if it isn't used, it's potentially right now like a dead space where activities and things could happen that aren't great. So that's sort of a concern that I'd love to hear what the direction is on that roof and what the plan is to protect the trees. Thank you.
You.
I'm just trying to put that image up on the screen. One moment here. So the short answer on the trees and root protection and so forth, I will, I'm not a tree expert, I'm not a tree guy, but I will ask our landscape architect and I'll check on the survey to see what's there and how that's anticipated to happen. I'm a big believer in trees and street trees and healthy tree canopies. So there's a bit of, how do I say this, slush in the design of that basement parking garage sort of space and access, that lump of foundation, if you will. There's a bit of flexibility with that. So we're not 100% certain exactly how that foundation will go, but our goal is to try to preserve those trees and that landscaping to the best extent possible. And it is big and it's healthy, and it may benefit from a little bit of healthy pruning to continue to maintain that health, but we'll certainly look at what that canopy and root structure would be, especially with respect to close lot line foundations. And let me just get the thing here. And then as for your concern about that back portion, which is here, it's actually elevated. It's hard to tell from what this is, but this roof level surface is actually about 2 feet higher than the interior ground floor. So it's not accessible from that retail space. An earlier iteration, before we had done all of our surveys, had thought about the potential that the ground floor could access that space as potentially as a terrace or a patio for a cafe or something. But as we kind of thought about that more, we realized that that would have an impact on you and anybody else in that backyard, because there's somebody having, their bottle of wine at, 2 o'clock in the morning, and you're living right next door. So we shied away from wanting to do that because it's not amenable to that kind of interaction. We do see the lid of that parking garage, this line across here, the lid of that access to the underground ramp, as being a low maintenance green roof type space, or a Riverstone space that's not accessible other than to maintenance personnel who may go up there to clean up the leaves periodically. So there's no access to it. And these windows that you see on the back of the stores are only there to provide some light into what is the back of a retail store, and no access to the actual roof surface itself. There's also a trying to remember the height, is it 1.4 meter high, 1.5 meter high fence that's along the property line, so that you're not looking directly at that landscape space.
I'm just cognizant of the fact that Chloe, sorry, I don't know which one it is yet, mentioned that the possibility of it being something used by residents. Is that something you also were able to comment on? And actually, Chloe, I'm going to unmute you again in case you wanted to provide brief follow-up.
Oh, sorry, was I muted that whole time?
Nope, no, that would be
okay.
A significant, dead space there if it was. Chloe, did you want to, sorry, I'm asking to unmute. Are you okay to?
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate the clarifications there. That's interesting. I hadn't realized there was a 2 feet difference between the roof level and the floor level. I mean, it does, though, the question comes then that the planter is sort of a perfect conduit from the street up to that roof. I have young kids. I can totally see them climbing along up there. There's nothing to protect you from or stop you from going up onto that roof. So I guess, there's probably detailed design here that needs to be looked at to keep people from going on that roof, because it does seem a little bit accessible right now.
It's intended that it is not accessible. There's a fence. I'm just trying to find the floor plan here, and show you that this. Okay, can you see the floor plan?
See it?
Yeah.
Okay, so there is a, there we go. So there is an intent that there is a fence along this side. That's I think it's 1.4 meters is the height requirement along
Right.
this side, as well as along this roof space here. And that this planter, I mean, we can't legislate how someone misuses a space. Someone could climb in there and, you know,
Well,
be an idiot.
living next to
and-
the Quickie Mart, I'll tell you, people do misuse
Yeah.
the space and
I
hop
know
over
that that's
the 6-foot fence as
possible.
it is.
But this is, you know, the foundation line is built along here.
Mhm.
And then we're not exactly sure what we're going to do in this space, but the intent is that this is the foundation line and this is sort of continuation of that green space. And it may end up being that we provide something along this edge so that someone doesn't fall off this edge while watering the begonias, but that there's no access onto this roof surface.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I have, I'm gonna go to Julian first, then Brian, just because we haven't heard from Julian yet. Julian, I'm asking you to unmute.
Hi, yeah, thanks. I'm actually not Julian. I'm just using his computer. My name's Anne.
I suspected that might be the case.
I
Thank you, Anne.
just want to reiterate what I said in the comments, and I don't know if I'm just beating a dead horse, but there's going to be a lot of glass in the windows, and if it's like any other building, they're going to open one tiny little strip of it. If I understand it correctly, the units are going to be small. The ones that are going to be abutting the bike shop will have windows on one side. And I just really think that if it could be required or whatever, that as much windows open as possible. I have kids who've lived in long tube apartments with no balcony, with no bathroom window, with no kitchen window, and air is important. Otherwise, you're just stuck living off your aircon, and we don't want that. Thank you. I know this is my particular issue, but I think it's really unfortunate. Thanks.
Thank you, Anne. Tony, did you want to comment on that?
No, just that I also think that fresh air and natural light is important, and making things as, you know, as big as possible. Unfortunately, the building code limits the maximum size of an opening to 4 inches, so that, you know, you don't fall out the window. And that's an unfortunate challenge of the building code, the way it's written. So unless the window still is much higher, and then you can have bigger openings and so forth. So there's some limitations, but in order to have flexible windows, they're sort of maximized unless there's opening out onto a balcony or a door or so forth. We did have in an earlier iteration, we did have the building sort of stop about 5 meters shy of the north lot line, so that you could have windows overlooking the bike shop and windows on corners. But that was prior to undertaking a snow loading study of the bike shop roof and structure, and looking at the buildability as well as the city's overall traditional Main Street design guideline expectations that someday that bike shop will disappear. Someday was it a CIBC building or Royal Bank building that was at the corner, the ulteriors? Someday that will either disappear or be consumed into something else, as in preserved as a structure. I would love to extend the project across those two sites and make a bigger unified structure, but you know, that's a different project for a different time.
Thanks, Tony. And I see you have a follow-up. I'll ask you to unmute again.
Yeah, thanks very much. I wasn't aware of the city wanting to make sure we don't drop ourselves out. But you know, those big buildings, those big windows that have 4 panes, you can up on the 2 panes that are at the top, you can have them open from the bottom. And I mean, again, if you can have 1 strip open, 2 panes open, you can get more air. And particularly if your 2 panes open, I'm sorry, I sound like a crank, that when it rains, people still be able to have their windows open. And I mean, it's not rocket science. Thank you.
No, absolutely. And I agree with you completely.
Yeah, thanks. And you sound like someone with thoughtful feedback. So thank you for that. And Brian, we're blessed to hear from you again. Glad glad to have you back. I'm asking you to unmute. And Brian's the last person I have on the list. I think we will wrap up after Brian. If you have a question, do put your hand up right now. Otherwise, we're going to wrap up. Brian, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. When I was talking before and being so effusive with my praise of the work that you've done, Ton, and I don't take anything away from that, but what I didn't ask you, and I don't believe it's the right time to be getting a detailed answer now, is with regard to my concern on amenity space, both private and communal, I haven't actually heard a convincing argument as to why it needs to be reduced from the minimum. The city's only got a minimum in there and you're going below the minimum. I'm not pleased with that at all. And I didn't make myself clear the first time around. That's all I wanted to say.
Okay, thanks. It's good feedback. You know, it's a design approach, something we've considered. We, looked at it, thought about it, made a decision to go forward with an application as it is, and we're listening to feedback, and we'll consider what our approach is to go forward from there.
Okay, thank you, Tone, and thank you to the applicant team more broadly, and to the owner, Arthur, who's joined us tonight, for being here and hearing all of this feedback. As you can probably tell by now, we've got a lot of thoughtful residents in this neighborhood. No one's saying we don't want rental, or we don't want you to build a building here. But there's some really great feedback we've heard tonight. Our office is going to keep working with the applicant team to see these changes come that will reflect that feedback. And also happy Tone and team to work on the staff side as well to see about transportation changes outside the scope of the application, because I think there's broadly agreement here that anything we can do to discourage traffic going down the wrong way on Grove would be ideal. So anyways, I don't want to go on forever here. It's already late. Really thank you to the community associations as well for being here and providing input, to Colette, the city planner, who had a presentation. Thank you so much for being here. And yeah, and thank you to everyone else for being here and providing comment. Thanks so much. We'll see you again soon.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone.